Most of the methods for calculating cash-on-cash return that I see circulating on the internet are overly simplified and don't take into account a lot of the factors that can significantly affect the accuracy of the measurement. I'm going to break down what cash-on-cash return actually means, why it's important in analyzing potential real estate opportunities, and how to calculate it correctly. I've created an easy-to-use spreadsheet to go along with this video that takes into account the additional input variables that are critical to getting an accurate cash-on-cash return, and it also allows you to compare the cash-on-cash return of multiple properties. I'll include the link to my spreadsheet in the description in case you want to check it out, and I also have a specific version for calculating the cash-on-cash return for short-term rentals. So let's start with defining what cash-on-cash return actually means. Cash-on-cash return is a very useful metric used by investors when analyzing and comparing investment opportunities. It can really help determine whether an asset is worth a deeper look if the projected cash-on-cash return is greater than your minimum threshold. In real estate specifically, the cash-on-cash return is a ratio of a property's pre-tax cash flow relative to the amount of cash invested in the property. This simplified equation is what you'll typically see if you search for how to calculate cash-on-cash return. On top is the annual pre-tax cash flow the property generated after subtracting operating expenses. For example, this would be all of the rent that you received for the year, minus all of your expenses like your mortgage payment, property taxes, insurance, and any other expenses related to operating the rental property. On the bottom is the total amount of cash that you paid out of pocket to purchase the property and get it ready to be rented. So this would be your down payment, plus any closing costs you paid out of pocket, plus any renovations and even furniture if you're doing a short-term rental. The problem with this simplified equation is that it doesn't capture the whole picture. There are missing variables that make the resulting percentage inaccurate. Because real estate investors often use debt to finance the purchase of the investment, it's important to consider incorporating the amount of principal that you're paying down on the loan each year into the cash-on-cash return. One thing that the cash-on-cash return calculation doesn't take into account is risk. So you'll have to evaluate that according to your own risk tolerance. Note that all of the dollar values in the cash-on-cash return equation are pre-tax, and the cash-on-cash return is measured over a 1-year time period and always expressed as a percentage. Also keep in mind that a property's cash-on-cash return can vary year to year, depending on changes in things like rent, expenses, or the amount of principal paid down on the loan. You might not be really focused on this in year one, but the cash-on-cash return after a mortgage is completely paid off will be significantly higher than the cash-on-cash return in year one when you're paying a lot of interest on the loan. As I alluded to earlier in the video, there are two versions of the cash-on-cash return. The first version only accounts for the cash flow that the property generates, but the second version also incorporates the amount of principal that is being paid down on the loan. Luckily, my spreadsheet calculates cash-on-cash return with and without principal, and you can see the projected cash-on-cash return in year 1, 10, and after the property is completely paid off. So let's go ahead and dive into my worksheet, and I'll walk you through a couple of examples. Okay, so this is my general cash-on-cash return calculator for real estate. I would use this if you're looking to do a long-term rental or a medium-term rental. If you want to do a short-term rental, then I actually have a spreadsheet that's specific for that, and I can show you that right after this one. So let me give you an overview of the spreadsheet first. All the input cells that you actually need to input information into are highlighted in yellow, and there's going to be multiple sections here. So the first section are the purchase details. The next section is rental estimates. Then you have your monthly expenses. And then my spreadsheet calculates the revenue that the property generates. And finally, the cash-on-cash return section, it takes into account all the input variables from above and calculates your return either based on cash flow only or also including the principal that you paid down on the loan as well as the cash flow. So let's go through this example quickly just so you can see how everything works. The purchase price for our single family home here is $500,000. Down payment is going to be 20%, so $100,000. The out-of-pocket closing costs that we had to pay on the getting the mortgage was $4,000. This is going to be a long-term rental, and we're not providing any furniture here, so $0. We did have to, do some painting and light surface renovations, so $2,000 for that. And then in this case, we don't have any additional one-time out-of-pocket expenses. So these two cells here, asking for how much principal is paid off in year 1 and year 10, are optional. Like, the spreadsheet will still work if you don't input these numbers, but I recommend that you do, because you're going to see how much higher the cash on cash return is when you include the amount of principal that's being paid off each year. So next, we're on to the rental estimate. What's important here for a stable long-term rental that doesn't have a lot of turnover is this monthly rent number. So we're assuming that the occupancy is 100% because you're not going to have much turnover. And we're also assuming that you're going to be renting this 12 months out of the year. Now we're on to monthly expenses. So the biggest one here, of course, is the mortgage. So the mortgage on this property is going to be $2,300 a month. The property tax is going to be $500 a month. Insurance is $100. There's no PMI because we put 20% down. You're going to be managing this property yourself, so there will not be a property management fee. However, if you did want to have a property manager and say they charge 15%, you can enter that, and this will calculate based on your monthly rent that you're going to be paying $525 a month for your property management. But we're going to put that back to 0 for this case. We're not going to have any HOA dues on this property, and we're going to be having the tenant pay all the utilities, so we're going to have 0 for those. However, we will have a gardener to maintain the landscaping. That's going to be $65 a month, and we don't have any additional monthly expenses. So right below here, you can see that it calculates your total monthly expenses and also the yearly expenses, which is going to be important for calculating the cash on cash return. Next is the revenue section. So your monthly revenue is based off of those rental estimates above, and then your monthly profit or cash flow basically just subtracts your monthly expenses, and then we extrapolate that out for the year to get our yearly cash flow, which is what we need for our cash on cash return calculation. So this is the main reason why you're here, the cash on cash return section. So first, we just calculate the total amount of cash that went into the deal and display that here so that you can see it. And then we go on to the two versions of cash on cash return. First version here is only considering cash flow. It's not considering any principal that's paid down on the loan. So the return in year 1 is 6%. Now, I also went ahead and put the projected return after the mortgage is paid off. So say you have a 30-year mortgage, in 30 years, this would be your cash on cash return. Now, it's not a perfectly accurate number because it's not taking into account appreciation of the property. So you'd imagine over the course of 30 years, most likely the property is going to appreciate, and that's not taken into account here. On to the next version of cash on cash return, which is the version that I prefer because it really gives you more of a complete picture of what your return actually looks like. And that is including the principal that you pay down on the loan. So in year 1, you can see that at 9.83%, the return is quite a bit higher if you include the principal. And I have also included year 10 in this case, just to show you that as you're paying off more of the principal and less of the interest as the years go on, your cash on cash return is going to keep going up. And then finally, after you pay off your mortgage, the cash on cash return will be the same, whether or not you're taking into account the principal paid down or not, because you're no longer paying down principal because the property is fully paid off. So let's say that you're going to purchase the exact same property, but this time you're going to be listing it on places like Airbnb and VRBO as a short-term rental. I have a spreadsheet that is specifically for short-term rentals that you see here. So let's just quickly go through what the differences are. Purchase price is the same, $500,000, same down payment, same out-of-pocket closing costs. But in this case, since it's a short-term rental, we're going to have to buy furniture, and that's going to cost $15,000 to furnish the entire home. The out-of-pocket renovations are the same, $2,000. no additional one-time out-of-pocket expenses. And then the amount of principal that's being paid off on the loan is the same. Now this rental estimate section is going to be different for a short-term rental versus a long-term rental. When you're doing a short-term rental, what you care about really is the nightly rate and the occupancy. So you can get pretty accurate estimates of these numbers by using sites like AirDNA, or you can kind of just manually go into Airbnb and look in the exact same area that you are, and you can see how often people are renting out their places and what their rates are. And then you can also enter how many days are you renting this place out per year. This is here because a lot of people, including myself, we want to stay at our vacation rental. So we don't want to make it available for the entire year. So that's why that cell is available. So in this case, we are assuming a nightly rate of $250 and an occupancy of 80%. So the monthly expenses have similarities, but also some additional expenses because it's a short-term rental. So the mortgage, property tax, insurance, PMI are all the same. Property management also applies in the short-term rental space. The fees for property management of short-term rentals are typically a lot higher than long-term rentals because there's a lot more work that needs to be done by the property management. And then the typical fee for using services like Airbnb or VRBO is 3% of all revenue. And you can see that the spreadsheet calculates that for you here based on the rental estimates that you gave above. Cleaning fees, I have it 0 because the people renting your place are going to be paying the cleaning fees. Again, no HOA dues. However, the county that this property is in, it charges a hotel tax. And that's going to be $50 a month. Gas and electric, you're paying this now because it's a short-term rental, and that's going to be $250 a month. Trash you found is $50 a month, and water is $75 a month. You're going to need to provide internet service for the people that are renting your place, and that's going to be $80. And you're going to be you have some consumables that you need to buy, toilet paper, soap, stuff like that. That's going to be about $100 a month. And then landscaping, it's going to be the same, about $65. And then you're not going to have any additional monthly expenses beyond what's already here. So your total monthly expenses, they are going to be higher versus a long-term rental. But as you'll see, your revenue more than makes up for the higher expenses. So yeah, you can look at the revenue section. The monthly revenue in this case is going to be $6,000 a month versus when it was a long-term rental, the monthly rent was $3,500 a month. So the cash flow after subtracting out your expenses is $2,281 a month. And then if you extrapolate this out for the rest of the year, that's $27,370. So you have a lot more cash flow. However, this is probably going to be a lot more work since you have a lot more turnover, a lot more guests, and honestly, there's going to be more risk versus a long-term rental. So the spreadsheet doesn't really account for that risk, but it will tell you how much more cash flow you can make if you do a short-term rental versus a long-term rental. So going into the cash on cash return section, so the total money into the deal is higher here because you had to purchase that furniture. But as you can see, the return is also a lot higher because of those higher cash flows. So not including principal, the cash flow on this example is 22.62% in year one. And then after you've paid off the mortgage, it goes up to 45%. But if you do take principal into account, the return will be the same, about 3% higher. However, the difference, it's not as meaningful here because the cash flows are so high. But the number is still here, just for your information. With principal included, it's going to be 25.93% in year one. And then in year 10, the return is going to be higher, as we discussed before, because you're paying more principal and less interest in year 10 versus year one. So your cash on cash return will be 32.54%. And then again, after the mortgage is paid off, your return goes up to over 45%. Now, I wanted to mention that there's no limit to the number of properties that you can analyze on this sheet. You can simply just keep on creating more tabs in order to compare as many properties as you want. So as I mentioned, both of these spreadsheets are available if you go to the link in the description. It'll take you to my Etsy store, and the spreadsheet is a couple of dollars, and it really helps support the channel. It allows me to keep creating content and useful tools for you guys. The cash-on-cash return isn't the only metric that you should take into consideration when analyzing an investment opportunity, but it is a great screening tool to see if an asset meets your minimum return requirements, and it's also a great way to directly compare multiple investment options. Like most analysis tools for investing, the cash-on-cash return calculation isn't perfect, and it does come with some limitations, like the fact that it only measures pre-tax cash flow and doesn't take into account your specific tax situation. It also doesn't take into account the potential appreciation or depreciation of the property. But with all that said, I hope you're able to take away something from this video. Remember, I'm not a financial advisor, and this video is just for your entertainment. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.